The ice cracks like gunshots under 12-year-old Katsumoto Saotome's wooden clogs as he breaks the frozen surface of the fire defense water tanks. March 9th, 1945, 10:30 p.m. Tokyo shivers under a bone-piercing northwestern wind that howls through the bamboo groves and paper-thin wooden houses like a hungry ghost. Above him, stars pierce the crystal-clear sky with unusual brightness, as if the universe itself is holding its breath. Katsumoto! Check the water gun mechanism again. His father's voice carries the edge of a man who's practiced this ritual every night for months. The imperial chrysanthemum crest gleams on their neighborhood's single water pump, their proud defense against American incendiary bombs. Around them, neighbors clutch bamboo spears with the same reverence samurai once held katanas. Mrs. Tanaka demonstrates the proper thrust technique to her 8-year-old daughter. Aim for the belly, Akiko-chan. American soldiers are soft there. 6 blocks away, 6-year-old Shizuko Nishio arranges paper flowers for tomorrow's birthday party, her mother humming while folding origami cranes. "Make a wish, little bird," her mother whispers, not knowing these will be the last words her daughter ever hears her speak. The radio crackles with reassuring static. First enemy formations changing course southward, moving away from the capital. Citizens may rest peacefully tonight. But 25,000 feet above their heads, 334 B-29 Superfortresses circle like silver sharks in the moonlight. These aren't the heavily armored bombers Tokyo has learned to fear. General Curtis LeMay has stripped away their defensive guns, their armor plating, even their ammunition, cramming every available inch with something far more terrifying. 1,665 tons of jellied gasoline designed specifically to turn wooden cities into funeral pyres. 24-year-old librarian Hashimoto Yoshiko organizes her civilian fire brigade's equipment one final time. Leather buckets, sand containers, and canvas beaters that seem pathetically small under the vast star-filled sky. She doesn't know that American scientists spent months in Utah desert test sites, building perfect replicas of Japanese neighborhoods and burning them again and again, timing how fast the flames would spread, measuring how hot the fires would burn, calculating exactly how much napalm it would take to create an unstoppable inferno. The wind gusts stronger now, rattling windows and sending loose roof tiles clattering into the narrow streets. Perfect firestorm conditions, bone-dry wooden structures, 65-mile-per-hour gusts from the northwest, humidity so low that static electricity sparks between Saotome's fingers when he touches the metal pump handle. "Look!" a neighbor points skyward. The first Pathfinder planes. High above, lead B-29s begin dropping their markers. Not the usual explosive bombs, but something that falls like silvery Christmas tinsel, creating a giant burning X across the heart of Tokyo's most densely populated district. 75,000 people per square mile. 750,000 souls packed into 12 square miles of paper and wood. How do you defend a city built to burn against fire, designed to consume everything it touches? The answer will come in exactly 45 minutes. What the people of Tokyo don't understand, what they cannot possibly comprehend as they clutch their bamboo spears and arrange their leather fire buckets, is that they are about to become test subjects in the most calculated act of civilian destruction in human history. In the Pentagon War Room 6,000 miles away, General Curtis LeMay studies weather reports with the cold precision of a chess master planning checkmate. The 40-year-old Air Force commander has abandoned everything the military taught him about precision bombing. High-altitude daylight raids targeting military factories. Useless. Japanese war production has scattered into thousands of tiny workshops hidden in civilian neighborhoods. Armored bombers flying defensive formations. Wasteful. Japanese night fighters are nearly blind. Their radar primitive. Their fuel running low. LeMay's radical gamble: strip the bombers naked, fly them low and fast, and burn Japan's cities to ash with incendiary weapons that turn entire neighborhoods into crematoriums. "We're going to burn them out," he tells his staff officers. "Tokyo is a paper city. We're going to make it disappear." Back in Tokyo, the illusion of safety feels absolute. Young Saotome practices his elementary school fire drill routine. 30 children forming bucket brigades, passing water from hand to hand while reciting patriotic slogans. "Japanese spirit will overcome American material," their teacher proclaims, not knowing that American material now includes napalm formulated to stick to human skin and burn underwater, jellied gasoline that generates temperatures hot enough to melt steel. The Tokyo Fire Department's statistics read like a death sentence disguised as preparation. 8,000 firefighters for nearly 4 million people. Exactly 3 extension ladders for the entire capital city. 17 fire stations to cover 220 square miles. Water pressure so low that hoses barely reach second-story windows. But the government's propaganda machine churns out confidence. Superior Japanese fighting spirit will triumph over American cowardice. At 11:30 p.m., the first radio warnings begin, but they sound almost routine. Enemy formations approaching from the southeast, estimated 30 aircraft, maintain firewatch procedures. Citizens across the city check their preparations one final time. Sand buckets, filled. Water barrels, topped off. Bamboo fire beaters, within arm's reach. Children's emergency escape routes, memorized and practiced. What they don't know is that American intelligence officers have spent months mapping every detail of their neighborhoods. Aerial photographs reveal the precise width of streets, too narrow for effective fire breaks. Construction surveys identify building materials, traditional post and beam wooden frames with paper walls, designed to flex during earthquakes, but helpless against sustained heat. Weather analyses predict wind patterns that will turn small fires into citywide conflagrations. Hashimoto Yoshiko gathers her fire brigade volunteers in the narrow street outside the library. 15 housewives and elderly men, armed with wet towels and canvas beaters, tasked with defending 10 city blocks. "Remember," she tells them, "incendiary bombs scatter burning pieces. We must move quickly from spot to spot, preventing the fires from joining together." Her instructions follow official government doctrine based on facing traditional magnesium incendiaries. Small, contained fires that trained civilians could actually extinguish. But the weapons approaching Tokyo aren't traditional incendiaries. They're revolutionary M69 cluster bombs, each one packed with 38 separate napalm canisters designed to spread liquid fire across areas the size of football fields. A single cluster bomb creates fires so intense they generate their own weather systems. Tornado-force winds that hurl burning debris for miles, temperatures that turn asphalt streets into flowing rivers of tar. At midnight exactly, 6-year-old Shizuko Nishio wakes to her mother shaking her gently. "Put on your padded air raid clothes, little bird. The sirens might sound tonight." Shizuko dresses sleepily in the thick cotton jacket and pants designed to protect against bomb fragments. Clothing that will become her funeral shroud when soaked with napalm and ignited by radiant heat. The psychological preparation runs deeper than physical defenses. For months, Japanese civilians have been conditioned to view American bombing as a test of national character. Surrender is unthinkable. Retreat is shameful. The emperor's subjects will stand and fight with bamboo spears if necessary, preferring death to dishonor. This cultural programming, this absolute refusal to flee, will trap hundreds of thousands in the coming inferno. Across the Pacific, B-29 crews receive their final briefings. These aren't the typical military targets they've trained to hit. aircraft factories, steel mills, naval bases. Tonight's target zone contains apartment buildings, schools, neighborhood temples, market streets where children buy candy, and elderly couples sell handmade crafts. The crews know this. Some wrestle with the moral implications. Others focus on the strategic necessity. Break Japanese civilian morale before the planned invasion costs 1 million American lives. At 12:10 a.m., March 10th, the Pathfinder B-29s cross Tokyo Bay. Their target, a dense residential area where 750,000 people sleep in wooden houses built generations ago, when fire was mankind's greatest fear and water was considered the ultimate protection. Young Saotome stands at his window, watching searchlights sweep the sky like fingers of light trying to grasp the approaching danger. The air feels electric with anticipation, charged with the same energy that precedes summer thunderstorms. But this storm won't bring rain. It will bring liquid fire falling like snow, burning rivers that boil human flesh, and temperatures hot enough to melt the metal fire engines racing toward an impossible battle. The silver sharks are circling. The Pathfinders are in position. The wind is perfect. And Tokyo is about to learn what happens when medieval defenses meet industrial warfare. 12:15 a.m. The Pathfinder B-29s release their markers, and suddenly the night sky erupts in impossible beauty. Incendiary clusters fall like silvery waterfalls, each bomb splitting open to scatter brilliant white-hot canisters across the darkness. From his window, young Saotome watches in amazement as what looks like Christmas tinsel drifts down through the crisp March air, sparkling and glittering as it falls toward the sleeping neighborhoods below. "It's beautiful," whispers his little sister, pressing her face against the cold glass. The first napalm canisters strike the wooden rooftops with soft thuds, then explode in fountains of jellied fire that spread like spilled paint across the traditional tile surfaces. Within seconds, 38 separate fires bloom from each cluster bomb, creating a giant burning X that marks the target zone for the massive bomber formation still approaching from the southeast. Mrs. Tanaka runs into the street clutching her bamboo spear, shouting the neighborhood fire drill commands, "Small fires first!" Prevent them from joining. But these aren't small fires. Each napalm canister spreads liquid flame across areas 2,000 feet long and 300 feet wide. The bamboo spear ignites in her hands like a match. Hashimoto Yoshiko races toward the library with her fire brigade, their canvas beaters and leather buckets suddenly pathetic against fires that tower 30 feet into the air and generate heat waves visible in the darkness. The wet towels they've wrapped around their faces begin steaming, then smoking, as radiant temperatures climb toward 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt copper, hot enough to turn water into superheated steam, hot enough to ignite human clothing from the heat alone. "The water!" Yoshiko screams, pointing toward their neighborhood's fire defense tank. But when she reaches the concrete reservoir, she discovers the water is boiling. Actually boiling from the radiant heat of the surrounding fires. Steam rises from the surface like fog, and when she dips her leather bucket, it comes up filled with water too hot to touch. 12:30 a.m. The main bomber formations arrive. 300 B-29s flying so low that Saotome can see individual crew members in the cockpit windows. One Superfortress passes directly overhead, so close he could hit it with a thrown stone if he had superhuman strength. The plane's silver fuselage reflects the growing fires below, making it look like a flying mirror carrying captured pieces of hell. The bombardier in that B-29 later describes the turbulence from the fires below. The aircraft was bouncing around like a ping-pong ball. The thermal updrafts were so violent we could barely control the plane. Looking down was like staring into the mouth of a blast furnace. But for the people trapped in that furnace, the experience defies description. 6-year-old Shizuko Nishio runs hand in hand with her mother toward the designated evacuation zone, a school playground that officials promised would serve as a fire break. When they arrive, they find 200 other families crowded into the small space, all of them believing the same official lie: open ground means safety. The napalm doesn't recognize safe zones. Cluster bombs fall directly into the playground, turning the entire area into a lake of liquid fire. Shizuko watches her mother's padded air raid clothes ignite spontaneously from the heat, sees the other children in her kindergarten class running in circles with their hair on fire, screaming for parents who are themselves human torches stumbling through the blazing night. Later, rescue workers will find the skeletal remains of all 20 children from Shizuko's class melted together in a single mass of fused bone and metal. Belt buckles, shoe eyelets, and school badges creating a grotesque sculpture of childhood destroyed. "Mother?" Shizuko calls into the flames, but there's no answer except the roar of fire consuming everything that once felt permanent and safe. 1 a.m. The fires begin creating their own weather system. Superheated air rises so rapidly it forms tornado-force downdrafts that suck burning debris into spiral columns hundreds of feet high. Telephone poles snap like twigs in winds that exceed hurricane strength. Roof tiles fly through the air like deadly projectiles. The fire itself begins making sounds no human has ever heard, a deep rumbling moan that comes from the earth itself as underground gas lines explode and sewer systems vaporize. Young Saotome's family attempts their planned escape route, running toward the Sumida River, where officials promised water would provide natural protection. But when they reach the riverbank, they discover the water is literally boiling. Bodies float in the current like logs, not corpses, but people who jumped in seeking relief and were cooked alive as the water temperature rose above 180 degrees. "We have to cross," Saotome's father decides, looking at the flames advancing behind them. "It's our only chance." His mother stops, pulls down her pants, and urinates in the street. "Sorry," she tells her shocked children. "It's not easy running with a full bladder, and we may not get another chance." They never reach the other side. The metal bridge they're crossing becomes too hot to touch, then begins glowing red like a giant heating element. Saotome's father's shoes melt to the bridge surface. His mother's hair ignites from radiant heat before any flame touches her. Only Saotome survives, pulled from the water by a stranger who dies saving him, leaving the 12-year-old alone in a world that no longer makes sense. 1:30 a.m. The Tokyo Fire Department's desperate counterattack begins and ends simultaneously. Fire engines race toward the blazes with sirens wailing, but the trucks themselves become victims when their tires melt, their fuel tanks explode, and their crews die at their posts. Of the 125 firefighters who respond to the emergency, not one survives. Their engines become metal monuments scattered throughout the burning district, twisted sculptures commemorating the futility of fighting industrial warfare with industrial-age equipment. Hashimoto Yoshiko makes one final attempt to save the library, the building that contains her life's work and her neighborhood's cultural memory. She soaks herself in the boiling water from the fire tank, wraps wet cloth around her face, and charges into the burning building to rescue what books she can carry. Inside, she discovers that paper burns differently when the air temperature exceeds 1,000 degrees. The books don't catch fire. They simply vanish, dissolving into ash so fine it floats away like gray snow. Centuries of Japanese literature, children's stories, family photographs, and handwritten letters disappear as she watches, becoming part of the black clouds that now block out the stars. She never makes it back outside. Later, investigators will find her remains in the library entrance. her body curled around a single book, a collection of children's poetry she died trying to save. 2 a.m. The firestorm reaches full intensity. Temperatures in the core burn zone exceed those inside steel blast furnaces. Glass windows don't just break, they melt and flow like watered-down building walls. Metal fire escapes glow cherry red, then white-hot, then collapse into pools of molten steel. Human bodies don't just burn. They're consumed so completely that only shadows remain, burned into concrete sidewalks like negative photographs. The most horrifying discovery comes at dawn. In the designated safe evacuation zones, rescue workers find piles of bodies stacked 2 meters high. Families who followed official instructions and died together in spaces that were supposed to protect them. Men, women, children, and elderly grandparents melted into single masses of fused flesh and bone, their final act being to hold each other as the fire consumed everything they had ever loved. By 3 a.m., 16 square miles of Tokyo have simply ceased to exist. Not damaged, erased. Where neighborhoods stood 6 hours earlier, only ash plains remain, broken by the twisted metal skeletons of buildings and the occasional concrete foundation marking where someone's home used to be. 100,000 people are dead. 1 million are homeless. And in the morning light, survivors will discover that their bamboo spears have become piles of charcoal. Their water guns have melted into abstract sculptures, and their faith in traditional defenses has been burned away as completely as their city. The silver sharks have finished feeding. The sky no longer rains fire. But for the survivors, the burning will never stop. Dawn breaks over a landscape that looks like the surface of an alien planet. Where Tokyo's most densely populated neighborhood stood 12 hours earlier, only ash plains stretch to the horizon, broken by the blackened skeletons of concrete buildings and the occasional metal water tank twisted into abstract sculptures by heat that exceeded the melting point of steel. 12-year-old Katsumoto Saotome wanders through streets he no longer recognizes, calling for his family in a voice that echoes off empty foundations. His neighbors' houses have vanished so completely that only rectangular patches of ash mark where families lived for generations. The bamboo spears they clutch so proudly now form small piles of charcoal. And the fire defense water tanks are filled with a gray sludge that was once human beings. But Saotome survives to become something extraordinary, a man who dedicates his life to preserving the memories of those who didn't. For 80 years, he will collect survivor testimonies, becoming an award-winning writer whose books ensure that the voices of March 10th never fade to silence. People must know what this was like, he writes decades later. Not just the statistics, but the human faces, the individual stories, the children who never came home. 6-year-old Shizuko Nishio emerges as the sole survivor of her kindergarten class, found 3 days later wandering in a daze through the ash-covered ruins of her neighborhood. She will carry the trauma for the rest of her life, but also becomes a living bridge between historical horror and modern warning. In 2022, at age 83, she watches news footage of Ukrainian children sheltering from Russian bombs and whispers, "This is me, that little girl crying in the shelter. This is me in 1945." The immediate strategic impact of Operation Meetinghouse exceeds every expectation. Japanese civilian morale doesn't just crack, it shatters completely. Post-war surveys reveal that 70% of Tokyo residents knew the war was lost after the firebombing, though they dared not speak such treasonous thoughts aloud. General LeMay's gamble has worked. Breaking civilian will proves more effective than destroying military targets, but the human cost creates ripples that extend far beyond strategic victory. Families like the Suzukis spend decades searching for missing children who simply vanished in the flames. 22 years after the bombing, Suzuki Shizuo finally discovers his wife and daughter's remains, not bodies, but skeletal fragments mixed with melted metal in what used to be their neighborhood temple. I never stopped looking, he tells investigators. Every time workers dug up old foundations, I would go to see if they had found my family. The Tokyo firebombing demonstrates something terrifying about modern warfare: the complete erasure of the distinction between military and civilian targets. Unlike the atomic bombs that would follow, which at least targeted cities with military significance, Operation Meetinghouse deliberately targets the most densely populated residential areas specifically because they contain the most civilians. The strategy succeeds so well that it becomes the template for destroying 66 other Japanese cities before the war's end. Yet for decades, this horror remains hidden in historical shadow. No memorials commemorate the 100,000 civilians who died in a single night, more than were killed at Hiroshima. No government compensation acknowledges the survivors' suffering. No international tribunal questions whether burning residential neighborhoods constitutes a war crime. The firebombing victims become the forgotten casualties of a necessary victory. Today, as drone warfare and urban combat create new forms of civilian targeting, the lessons of March 10, 1945, take on urgent relevance. Modern military planners study LeMay's tactics not as historical curiosities, but as proven methods for breaking enemy morale through terror. The ethical questions raised by Operation Meetinghouse: when does military necessity justify targeting civilians? How do we balance strategic effectiveness against human cost? Remain as controversial today as they were 80 years ago. But the most powerful legacy lives in the voices of survivors like Shizuko Nishio, who transform personal trauma into universal warning. When she looks at a model incendiary bomb in a museum display, her hands still shake. When she sees images of modern urban warfare, she sees her 6-year-old self running through streets that burned like hell itself. I was just a little girl who wanted to celebrate her birthday, she reflects. But war doesn't care about birthdays, or children, or families who just want to live in peace. That's why people must remember, not just the date or the numbers, but what it felt like to be human in those flames. Remember their names. Remember their faces. Remember that behind every strategic victory lie real people who loved, laughed, and dreamed before the sky rained fire and changed everything forever.